Hey everybody, welcome back. Nice to see you. Tonight I've got with me Joe and Jen and
Hi.
Zoe.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Hi guys. We're really pleased to have you back, Zoe. You went on a bit of a sabbatical, didn't you, from our book club podcast, but you're back and we're really pleased to see you.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome, and you're welcome too, Jen, because you joined us again to do a podcasting guest appearance, if you like, or
Yes.
not exactly an appearance, but you know what I mean. So tonight we're talking about Home Fire, which is the seventh novel by a British writer called Kamila Shamsie. And the same year that Home Fire was listed for the Man Booker Prize in 2008, it actually won the Women's Prize for Fiction. So it's a loose retelling of Antigone, set among a family that's divided by politics and love and radicalism. It's less than 300 pages and it manages to do all the things that I want novels to do. It takes us from suburban streets of Wembley to the killing grounds of the Islamic State ravaged Raqqa. Shamsie tackles issues of terrorism, political showboating, and jihadi recruitment in London through the prism of a classic two sides of the tracks love story. So this is who we're going to be discussing tonight. We read it with Book Club a while back, so we've had to refresh our memories a bit, but there are some themes in this book that come through quite strongly. And the first theme that we're going to talk about tonight is sacrifice. Zoe, I'll come to you first. What did you think about the theme of sacrifice in the book?
Hi, Christina. Well, this book really has a phenomenal ending, which we're not going to give away, and many, many twists and turns. It is a tragedy. So there are many sacrifices that get bigger and bigger as the novel goes on. But we start the novel with Isma, who is the older sister of three siblings. There's Isma, Anika, and Parvez, and the latter two are twins. Isma's the older sister, and really the novel opens with the story of her sacrifice. She's had to put her academic career on hold and she's just managed to get back to the US after a period of about 10 years looking after her younger siblings because they've been orphaned. So the story starts with her checking in on her siblings and is really framed from the point of view of her emotional, physical sacrifice. We find out later that the family's dad is absent because he is somebody who was accused and captured for terrorism and later died in Guantanamo Bay. So the family already has a past and a history that Isma, I think, is trying to distance herself from by focusing in her studies. On second reading, it really struck me how well Shamsie writes these characters, because on reading about Isma's sacrifices again and the things she had to do to look after her brother and her sister, it struck me how much this actually forms part of how she sees herself, and her world and her complete identity is based around herself and her siblings and the sacrifices that she's made for them, which namely were to stop going to university and school. She had to get a job and really support their emotional and physical well-being throughout their teenage years in the absence of their parents. To what extent that she actually is like a mum or whether she's like a sister is very blurred. I think for her that the lines are very, very blurred. And it's interesting, I know we're going to talk about Antigone a little bit later in our discussion because, as you say, Christina, the book is based on that. And in Antigone, although there's not literal incest in this book, it is a very incestuous, very closely knit family line where the lines between sister and mother are really, really blurred for Isma. I think for her, she almost views herself as a martyr, and by that I mean not with any radical terrorist or political implications, but in the purest form that her life and her service thus far has been dedicating herself and building up her family from the ruins of an absent father and a deceased mother. So I was interested to see how martyrdom can be seen not just in the extreme contexts that are later brought up in the novel, but also in the sense of a woman's role and a woman's work within the family, where she martyrs herself to look after those who come after her, the children or the siblings.
And right at the beginning of the book, I don't know if you remember this bit, Zoe, but there's the scene where she's at Heathrow Airport, isn't she? Isma? Yeah, and she's being searched because she's trying to get to the US. And I found that scene quite disturbing. I don't know what the other guys thought about it.
Yeah, I felt it was so unfair because of how she looks, in other words, with the hijab. She knew she'd get searched and allowed time for it, yet she still missed her flight.
Yeah.
When nobody seemed to care about that. She was just released and dismissed after the search and the detainment, after she'd been proved. I think it was like, do you consider yourself British, was the questions, and she had to almost prove that she did like Britain, which is ridiculous because she was born and lived there.
Yeah.
I just felt it was so unfair that they didn't even get her on another flight. So she would have lost that flight money, which is dreadful.
Yeah, indeed. Going on now to the theme of loyalty, which also runs through the book. It's a big thing, really. Jen, what did you think about all the loyalty stuff? You know, how people are torn between.
Well, I actually only finished this book a couple of weeks ago because I didn't read it with book club. And loyalty was the thing that really stuck out. There's so many different types of loyalty. So you say about Isma being loyal to her family, Zoe.
Yeah.
She's also very devout. And actually, when the brother did go off, it was her. I don't know if I'm giving it away, but it was her that did the right thing and actually was disloyal and reported him. She did the right thing. So that meant when he returned, he wouldn't be able to regain his citizenship. And then in doing so, when Anika found out, of course, then she didn't want to talk to Isma, which we saw was quite distressing.
Just so the listeners will know what this is about, Jen. Explain, what's happened. Why has Parvez left? What's he doing?
So there was Parvez's father, as you know, was kind of an absent terrorist jihadi, and then somebody kind of got a hold of this called Farouk, and his job was to radicalize and recruit.
Yes.
But Farouk presented himself as, a friend, I suppose, a great mate who loved Parvez, just thought he was the best, and then kind of persuaded him through the loyalty to his father that he would be doing the right thing by his father. And if he went out there, he'd find all the people that fought with his father and he can learn about it. And they'd be so proud to meet the son of the great war hero. So he abused that. And then, of course, Parvez kind of distanced himself from everyone. And a bit like, he was looking for something, I think. You said about Parvez kind of being in an all-female household. He found this kind of group of men that, loved him, and he found his... Of course, that wasn't the case when he got out there, but he was led to believe that and was quite easily radicalized, I felt, by Farouk, using his loyalty to his father as the tool. But there was a lot of other things. The biggest one, I think, Joe, you might talk about this, is the Home Secretary, who knew the family originally, so they knew of him. And then they met the son, who was called Ayman, because he's kind of turned his back on his Muslim heritage. And the Home Secretary had a history that he used his Muslim roots to get voted in, and then very soon kind of attended a Christian church. But he did have a very loyal family. He was which I really liked. I thought he was, rather than being a monster, there was a lot of affection in his own family life. So when his son, I suppose, I don't know if we're saying this, give it away, but when his son kind of was disloyal, if you like, it was heartbreaking for him. But his loyalty was a little bit skewed because it was for his career. And then his wife, which was interesting, his wife, who, they were a very loving couple. I think she was of Irish heritage. The quote was, she said, when the situation with Anika exploded, she shouted at him and she said, oh my gosh, which I can't actually find now written down, but it was like, be human, do the right thing.
Yes.
She was quite shocked at he was trying to be a Home Secretary and uphold what looked like the right thing and what the voters wanted, but actually I think it lost his humanity along the way, and he lost the loyalty of his family and his son, as we will find out.
Yeah, thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
Joe, you might like to tell us, because there's another theme in this book, isn't there, which is strong, which is identity.
Yeah.
So, you know, Joe, what did you think about the identity theme in the book when you?
Well, it's a big theme, yes. I mean, it's as we've said, it's a contemporary retelling of Antigone, and it's effectively done through the story of two immigrant families, both of Pakistani Islamic heritage, the Pashas and the Lones, and how they differently deal with the conflict between being Muslim and having a heritage that they are or aren't proud of, and being British, and to what extent their loyalty to Britain as their new home supplants their love for their heritage. And that's part of the tension in the book. And Shamsie highlights the conflict between these two factors, what it means to be Muslim and what it means to be British, how hard it is to be both. So we've had the example already of Isma's interview by the security officer at Heathrow, that purely because she turns up there in a hijab, for no other reason, she's taken aside and questioned. Her loyalty to Britain is put to her. How can you be British? Do you feel British? And it happens on other occasions. Karamat Lone, who's now become Home Secretary, has decided that the best way for him to advance himself politically is to abandon his love for his heritage, if you like, and cleave to Britain and loyalty to his new country. So he is described in one place as having, he says he has a Muslim background, but Shamsie says basically he spends the whole book striding away from his Muslim background. He's decided to dispense with that for the sake of his career. There's an example where he goes back to his old school to talk to the pupils, most of whom are from Muslim families. And he basically says to them, look, you've got to forget all your cultural obligations and your old-fashioned way of looking at life and adopt British attitudes and British values as the only way you'll get on in life. So he's clearly setting out the way he's decided to live his life. And when it comes to the denouement, with Anika running off to Pakistan to retrieve Parvez's body, which is not meant to be a spoiler, but there are deaths in this book, I'm afraid. I won't tell you exactly what happens at the end, but Anika goes out there and behaves as Antigone to retrieve her dead brother's body, and as well as Parvez, the if you like, the rebel brother, being stripped of his British nationality by Karamat Lone, so is Anika. She's nothing other than vindictive. She's done absolutely nothing wrong apart from try to get her brother's body back.
I think there was in some of the Karamat said he wanted to do that also because he didn't want her around his son, because his son was clearly smitten with her. So I think that was quite a personal choice as well, wasn't it?
That's a good point. And of course, we did get to the stage where another renunciation of natural love, if you like, Ayman renouncing his father and going off to Pakistan to pursue Anika, which...
And he did it very publicly, didn't he, Joe?
Yeah, very publicly, and revealed in real time on the television to Karamat Lone. He's sitting in his study watching it all happen.
That's right.
So streamed that part of the book, the ending, which I'll say no more about in terms of the ultimate ending.
No spoilers here.
Extremely well written. It's very, very gripping. I'll be able to put it down.
Actually, when we think about this book now, how actually pertinent it still is. When she published it in 2018, if you remember, there was at the same time in the news and the media was all the talk of the Begum girl who, had gone to join jihadis and was wanting to come back to the UK, and it was decided that she couldn't and that she was stripped of her citizenship. So we have this book, which was so timely, And at the time, of course, we had Sajid Javid, who was the Home Secretary. So there's a lot of parallels between what was going on in the UK at the time in Britain, how we were deciding about whether or not we were going to let people who had, gone off to join jihadis, whether we're going to let them come back or not. And we're still rumbling along that now, because there's more in the press at the moment, isn't there, Zoe, about the Bacon girl?
Yeah, Shamina's actually done an interview wearing what we would consider westernized clothes very recently, and said she would rather die than go back to ISIS. So once again, she's in the news, and people are debating whether or not she has the right to return to the UK. So it's still been going on even this week.
Yeah, exactly.
I think reading the radicalization of Parvez, he was just a complete victim in it. It was awful. He had no idea how it was going to be. He wasn't going to go out there to fight. He was going to go out there to work for the media side. So I feel that passage, that radicalization, was a really good insight to how maybe that young girl was led to all these lies and radicalized. And she was very young as well.
She was 15, I think.
She was 15, and she and her two friends, the three of them, all went out there to become brides of ISIS fighters. I mean, what a thing to do, to leave your family in London, set off halfway across the world to become the forced wife of a man that you don't know, never met.
Yes.
Fighter from another country. I think Shamima Begum ended up marrying a Dutch ISIS fighter.
That's right.
And then lost 3 babies in the course of the whole thing.
That's right, she did. Just going back to the book a minute, because actually we should make it clear to the listeners that Parvez actually was wanting to come back, wasn't he? He wanted to come back to the UK. In fact, he was fleeing he
was
so
killed
close.
trying to escape.
He was. Yeah, he was fleeing, and unfortunately lost his life when he was fleeing. But we won't tell you exactly how that happens or who does it. But actually, there's a lot in this book that makes us realise that all the issues that were there in 2018 are still here in 2021. We haven't really resolved it. The blurb on the back of the book includes the quote, "It makes you think uncomfortably."
Yeah.
So while we're talking about this subject, is it something, when we're talking about big issues like religion and radicalism and racism, do you guys find it easy to say how you feel about it, to speak your views out clearly, or do you tend to be quite reticent about sharing your opinions?
I think I'm quite reticent because I don't think I'm in a position to have an opinion. Because I'm not in it personally. I don't have the correct information. I mean, reading books, particularly The Beekeeper of Aleppo.
Yes.
The other week, that was like, oh my God, that's awful. Why can't we just give everyone asylum and not have them trudge across countries? But I think the press is quite biased, I think. I think it's been really biased the last couple of years, particularly with UKIP, poisoning everybody's minds. And just as an aside, the airport scene where she was searched just because she had a hijab, and therefore it makes you a terrorist. When I was a student, we had some Northern Ireland boys on our course, and we went out to Barcelona, and they knew that they would get stopped.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's ridiculous. And of course, it's literally because they had a Northern Ireland passport.
Yeah.
And I think that is still present. I think that's still there. And I don't know, even though I find it shocking, I sometimes don't want to know. Does that sound awful? Because it's so depressing. I think the book did make me really hate jihadis and ISIS.
Yes.
It made me think they are just awful people doing this in the name of God and thinking they're doing the right thing.
I just want to say at this point something really interesting that I learned from a Muslim friend of mine a few years ago. So the origin of the word jihad actually has nothing to do with suicide bombing, martyrdom. Jihad actually means to make a journey or a religious pilgrimage. So I think for a lot of Muslims in the UK, and as a secular white woman I cannot speak on behalf of everybody, but what really, really surprised me was the way that this simple and quite beautiful word that purely means to pilgrim, to do something that really is related to your faith, has been turned almost into a verb, a noun, a word that's used to associate with people who kill, and it's horrible.
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation, isn't it? I think in this country at the moment as well, and with stuff that's been going on in Afghanistan as well recently, it's just brought everything back up to a head. Talking about Shamsie's prose, as always, she's written 7 novels, and this is the 7th of her novels. Always elegant, always evocative, I think. She just manages to pull off a fine balancing act, I think, in this book, between exploring the clash between society, family, and faith in the modern world, while also tipping its hat to the same dilemma that in the ancient one. So it's almost saying, how far have we really come?
Yeah.
Have we come anywhere near as far as we should have done in all these hundreds of years? What do you think, guys?
The thing I like about it is, yes, I agree that what the ancient Greeks knew 2,500 years ago is still true now.
Yes.
There's nothing about being human that they didn't know. So we think we're so great, we know everything, we find everything out. You've only got to look at the ancient Greeks to know everything about being a human being.
Just remind us, Joe, what the story of Antigone is about.
Well, it's essentially that Antigone is the equivalent, if you like, of Anika. It's a young woman whose brother is killed in a rebellion, and because he was a rebel, his body is dumped outside the city walls of Thebes, and the king of Thebes refuses to allow anybody to wash his body and bury it. And she's horrified because she wants to give it its proper religious dues and to bury it properly. And she breaks the law and is caught trying to retrieve the body and bury it. And she's condemned by the king, King Creon, and condemned basically to a horrible death, taken away.
Yeah.
And it all ends very, very badly. It involves the fact that Creon's son, who is conveniently called Haman,
Yes, no way.
is in love with Antigone, and he intervenes in a way that is tragic. So in the same way that there's a tragedy right at the end of Shamsie's novel, there's a tragedy at the end of Sophocles' story of Antigone.
Yeah,
Very much the same.
Yeah.
I didn't actually know the book was based on Antigone until afterwards, and the ending is very abrupt and it just leaves you hanging.
Yes.
And I actually couldn't quite believe the ending, because the writing is really a good pace. And I like the way I couldn't predict where the story was going, as it went along, because I didn't know it was based on Antigone. But the ending, I had to look it up. I thought, that's not happened.
Yeah,
and it did. She just left you, which I thought actually was quite good.
Yeah.
Because it left you quite shocked, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely felt shocked at the end of this book.
Yeah.
It's powerful. It really is. Looking at the book maybe from a feminist stance, what did you think about the roles of women in the book, and how much do you think the text was exploring the inequality between men and women? What did you think about that, Zoe? Did you?
Well, I know we've touched on it a little bit already, but really a lot of how Parvez is recruited into extremism is based on the fact that there seems to be no place for him in his family, which is quite matriarchal. You've got his twin sister, and his twin Anika.
Yeah.
So not only is his loyalty to his father's memory and to the work he did played on a lot, but also the fact that they're from a very low income family. They're struggling to make ends meet. The girls, they have their roles. Isma is caretaker, and Anika is finding her way in the world and studying, but yet there's no place for Parvez. And I think it's important to note that on the one hand, we could look at the way that female characters always sacrifice themselves for love, whether that be for their family, for romantic love. But on the other hand, you've also got to think about, and maybe ask yourself some uncomfortable questions about what men's role is in a modern society where women are becoming more and more empowered, and we've got young men and young boys who potentially are going to be targeted by people of all faiths and backgrounds. You've got, unfortunately, a tragedy in Plymouth recently where a young man was drawn in by what's called incel culture, which
Sure.
again plays on the stereotypes that feminism has damaged modern society in not providing a role for men and leading them to these acts of extremism. And it certainly made me think uncomfortably about how that can be resolved. I still don't have any answers on that.
Well, what was quite interesting is Anika was actually, when she was pursuing Eamon, which actually started with an ulterior motive, because she was actually being loyal to her brother. She was trying to get her brother, back in the country. But she was an incredibly sexual and powerful being, I thought. And I think there was something that she was naked, but she still had her hijab on, which I think the Eamon found fascinating. That she was such a confident sexual woman, and I mean, she really had him round her finger. She really did, because she'd turn up when she wanted to. She wouldn't give him her phone number. She was very much in control of that, I felt.
Yeah, there's a lot in this book about that, isn't there? As I said, it's less than 300 pages, but there's so much packed in. If you're thinking of reading it out there, would you guys say it's a good one for a book club to read?
Yes, definitely. There's so much to talk about, and it's likely to provoke good arguments or good discussions between people in a book club.
Yeah. So topical as well, isn't it? It just doesn't ever seem to go out of, oh, we've discussed that, that's all past, because we're still in it, actually. Do you think it's a good one for book club, Zoe?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, going back to your earlier question about whether or not we're reticent to share some of our views about political topics or topics that are maybe contestable, weighted, a book club is a really, really good place to talk about some of these things, because, as you were saying, you can get a different perspective. You can go behind the headlines almost and think about why a character is motivated to do something, as opposed to just reading opinion pieces, and to be able to discuss them with a book club with a book like this, I think is great.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I read this without the book club because I only read it last month. But when I read a book like this, it has a lot of issues, but fundamentally it's a really good story. And then I do miss that. I think, oh God, I wish I could talk to the book club about this, because like you said, it's not the same as looking up reviews or looking up online things, which might flesh it out a little bit for you. But sometimes in the book club, my opinions are changed. If you rate it, and then at the end of the book club, your rating might go up or down based on other people's perspectives of the book.
So one of the great things about book club isn't it, actually, is that you can thrash out these things. You feel that you can express your opinion, and it's okay to have your opinion. And you may not agree with everyone else's opinion, but that's okay. So big woo for book clubs, eh? On that note, we've come to the end of our podcast. Thank you again, panel, for coming along tonight. Thanks, Zoe. Thank Joe. Thank Jen.
Thanks.
Next month, we're going to be talking about The Heart's Invisible Furies by the great John Boyne. Thank you, listeners out there, for continuing to support us. We really appreciate it. Until then, keep safe and goodbye.